Alright, so for this video we will go over factoring quadratics using the AC method. Now the AC method is just one method that we can use to factor our trinomials and turn them into binomials. And the easiest way to go over this is to do some examples. So we have our factoring chart which takes into account our B and C values. So where does this come from? Well, up here near the chart I'm actually going to write the standard form of a quadratic, which equals ax squared plus bx plus c. So that's where we get our a, b's, and c's. And basically, if we look at that chart, we can see if b is positive or b is negative, and if c is positive or c is negative, what our factors are going to be. And you'll understand exactly what I mean by factors when we do some examples. So if we look at example number 1, we'll label this as example 1. We have this trinomial, this quadratic, and we want to simplify it. We want to factor it. So using the AC method, we want to do this. So we want to do A times C. So what is our A times C? Well, we can see our A, according to our standard form, is the number that's in front of our x squared. What's that coefficient? We see that to be 1. So our A is 1, and our C is 16. So we know that A times C would then give us 16. So then we want to see what are our factors of 16. Now, the reason why we want to see our factors is because our factors will wind up being our B value, that number that's in front of the X variable. So we want to list all of our factors. So we can say that the factors of 16 are 1 and 16. We can say that it's 2 and 8. We can say that it is 4 and 4. Now this is where the chart comes into play. We can see from the chart that our B value, our B term in front of the X is negative 10. So our B is negative, and our C is positive from that 16. So we're looking for a B value that's positive, that's negative, and a C term that's positive. And we can see, I'll highlight it, we can see we're talking about this right here from the chart. Okay, right there. Now after I highlight, I'm going to delete it just so that we can use this chart in the future. But that is what we're talking about right there. So we can see that our factors have to both be negative, negative. All right, so let me delete that. And now we have to make these factors negative. So let's make each factor now negative. Okay. All right, now that our factors are negative, we know that the sum of these factors have to be our B value. So now let's do some addition. Negative 1 plus negative 16 is negative 17. Negative 2 plus negative 8 is negative 10. And negative 4 plus negative 4 is negative 8. So when we look at these sums, which one equals our B value, which I'll underline right there? We're looking for negative 10. So we see that this has to be our choice. So we know using the AC method, we then separate our trinomial into a binomial. We have an X and an X, and now we use our factors. We have a minus 2, and we have a minus 8. And that will be our final answer. Now, we can always use FOIL or the double distribution method to turn this binomial back into a trinomial. And we can do that right now. So let me box this as our final answer. But then we will FOIL to see if it's truly an answer. So this is our check. So I'm going to put check down here. Okay. So the check is x times x, which is our first terms. We get x squared. Now we want our outer terms, the x times a negative 8, which is a negative 8x. Now we want our inner terms, which is negative 2 and an x, which is minus 2x. And then we want our last terms, which is a plus 16. Okay, we got that through FOIL, so I'll put FOIL because I know you guys like the word FOIL or double distribution. And if we combine like terms, we get x squared minus 10x plus 16. When we check that with our original trinomial, they equal one another, so we put a big check mark, and we realize that our binomial of parentheses x minus 2 times the parentheses of x minus 8 is our final answer. Alright, now for question number 2, that reads x squared minus 5x minus 6. The first thing we do, like we did in the first problem, is use our factoring chart to see what our terms are, and we can see that our b term is negative, and our c term is negative. So when we look at the chart, we read over that our factors have to be negative and positive, and that the largest absolute value number is negative. So that largest number has to be negative. So let's do the AC method, and then we could evaluate it. So a times c would be 1 times, what do we have, a negative 6, which equals negative 6. Now let's find our terms of negative 6. We have 1 and 6, and we have 3 and 2. But which one is positive and which one is negative? Well, according to our chart, the largest absolute value number is negative. So we can see that our largest number is 6, and our largest number here is 3. So they have to be negative. Now we take their sums. So what's 1 plus a negative 6? It would be a negative 5. And what's negative 3 plus 2? That would be a, let's see, that would be a negative 1. So we look at our b term now, and we see, there's our b term. We're looking for a negative 5. So our choices will be 1 and 6. So when we write that now as a binomial, we have two parentheses. We have an x and an x. And now what are our terms? We have a minus 6, and we have a plus 1. And that is our final answer. Like we did in the first problem, we could FOIL to check, but we did the AC method correctly. You can check on your own. That's the correct answer. Alright, the next problem, question 3 says x squared plus 9x minus 36, and we want to factor that. So again, we use the AC method, a times c, which would be 1 times 36, actually negative 36, and we get it to be negative 36. Now, what are our factors of negative 36? Well, we have 1 and 36. We have 4 and 9. We have 6 and 6. We have 12 and 3. That looks good. All right, so now it's a negative 36. So which one's positive and which one's negative? Well, we look at our chart, and when we have a plus b value, which is that plus 9, and a minus c value, which is that minus 36, we can see that our factors have to be plus and minus, and the largest absolute value number has to be positive. So our big number has to be positive. So if our big number is positive, all the small numbers have to be negative. So between 9 and 4, it has to be a negative 4. One of the 6's has to be negative, and our 3 has to be negative. Now when we do the sums of each, we can see that we have negative 1 plus 36 is positive 35. Negative 4 plus a 9 is 5. 6 minus 6 is 0. And 12 plus a negative 3 is 9. And we want to make sure that our sum equals positive 9. So we see that our choice would be 12, negative 3. So like we've been doing, we have our parentheses. We have our x, and our factors would be plus 12 and minus 3. Alright, so we'll go over now using the multiply-divide method to factor and the like-term factor method. Both methods could be used to factor quadratics. For our first quadratic, we have 4x squared minus 7x minus 15. The thing we see about this quadratic is that there's a 4 now attached to the x squared. That's why we have to use these methods. So both methods start with the AC method that we did in our previous examples. AC would now equal A is 4 and C is negative 15. And we can see that that product is equal to negative 60. So now we're looking for the factors of negative 60 that equal our b term, which is negative 7. So we could write a few, and then we'll stumble upon it. So we could have 1 and 60. Now, which one should be negative? Well, we have a negative 7 as our b. So our big number has to be negative. So we know that that's not going to work. Let's try another one. Let's try 20 and 3. Will that work? We got 3 and negative 20. Nope, that's not going to work. Alright, how about 15? 15 and what? We said 15 and 4. Will that work? Nope. So we have 4 and we have negative 15. Alright, so we know it's going to be a number that's a little bit less than 15 and a little bit greater than 4. So how about something like 12? Does 12 go? How about 12 and 5? Yep, 12 and 5 goes, and that seems like that will work. So let's think about that. If we put 5 and negative 12, what will that equal? Well, let's think about our sums. What are all our sums? Here we have negative 59. Nope, that's not going to work. Here we have negative 17. Nope, that's not going to work. Here we have negative 11. Nope. And finally, 5 plus negative 12. Oh, negative 7. So that is our answer. So let's box that in. These are going to be our terms. Now, how do I write this? Well, the multiply divide method says as soon as we find those terms, we immediately write our parentheses, our x, and we put in our terms. So it's plus 5 and minus 12. Okay. But now when we look at this further, we can see that our first terms of x, and when we have to do our first terms, that comes out to be x squared. But we have this 4 here, so we need 4. So what do? Well, we look at that term. We see that the 4 is in green. And let's multiply a 4. And we're going to put a 4 right there. Now, whatever we do on the left-hand parenthesis, we have to do the divide on the right-hand parenthesis. So if we multiply on the left, we have to divide on the right. If we divide on the left, we have to multiply on the right. And what do we get as our final answer? We get 4x plus 5 and x minus 3. And that will be our final answer. I'll box it in. Okay. Now, I'm going to show you another way, just in case someone does this on the quiz or a test. If you would have wrote x minus 12 and then x plus 5, you just rearrange the parentheses. You can still do the method which we talked about, which was 4 and divide by 4. However, your final answer wouldn't be a pretty one. This is technically a correct answer. But we said that when we factor, when we simplify our quadratic, we want to make sure that there are no fractions. So if this ever happened, if you ever saw that 5/4, just realize that if I rewrite it like this, I will get the right answer. So just make sure that if you do this, just say, don't panic. Just say, okay, if I put the x plus 5 first and do the multiply divide method, I will get the correct answer, or the most simplified answer. Remember, this is a correct answer. This right here is a correct answer. It's just not pretty. It's not as simple as our boxed in answer. Don't panic. Rewrite the binomial by switching up the parentheses, and you will get the correct answer. Alright? Now let's do the like term factor method. This method starts the exact same way with the AC method. So we have AC, and we see that our A is 3, and our C is 8. Again, there is an A term that's not 1. That's why we're using these methods. The A term is not 1 anymore. So it's 3, 8, and we see that that equals 24. So what are our factors of 24 that equal, the sum, equal 10? Well, let's list a couple. We have 1 and 24. We have 2 and 12. We have 8 and 4. We have 8 and 4, that's wrong. We have 6 and 4, my fault. And I think we can stop right there. Now, since they're both positive, we have a positive 10 and a positive 8. From the chart before, we know that all of our factors have to be positive. When we figure out the sums, we can see that the sum of 1 and 24 is 25. 2 and 12 is 14. And 6 and 4 is 10. And what are we looking for? Like we said before, we underline. We're looking for 10. So therefore, these are our factors right here. Alright? So what do? This is the like term factor method. We want to break up that 10x into its factors. So there's two factors, and we're breaking up that 10x into plus 6x and plus 4x plus 8. See what we did there? We took that 10x and we broke it up into its factors. Now, when we're at this step, we have to think about how can we factor this further? Can we take something out, make some parentheses? What can we take out? What do these terms have in common? Well, I'll underline it. We can see that this term, the first term, has a 3 and an x. And this term has a 6 and an x. So what do those terms have in common? Well, they both have a 3 in common, and they both have an x in common. So if I was to say 3x, I could then put in parentheses an x, because 3x times x would give me my 3x squared. And then I could plus what? 3x times what number will give me 6x? And we know that that number is 2. So 3x squared plus 6x can be rewritten as 3x parentheses x plus 2. Now let's look at what our two final numbers have in common. We have a 4x and we have an 8. They have 4 in common. So if I was to take a 4, what would I have to multiply to get those terms again? Well, 4 times what number gives me 4x? An x. And plus 4 times what number would give me 8? 4 times, we said we could know 2. Now, in class, we said that when you get to this step, do these parentheses equal one another? And they do. We can see that we have an x plus 2 and an x plus 2 in parentheses. If they did not equal one another, if they were not the same, we know we must have done something wrong with our algebra or our computations. So now that we're in this step, we can now turn this into a simpler form. And that simpler form is, since we see that 3x has to be distributed into that parentheses, and the 4 needs to be distributed into the parentheses, and both those parentheses are the same, we can rewrite this as 3x plus 4 in parentheses and x plus 2 in parentheses. It's still a double distribution. However, this is now in a simpler form. And that's how you do the like term factor method. Alright, so for the next quadratic, I'm actually going to factor it both ways to show you that you can use either method to factor quadratics. And I'm also going to, I chose this example because with quadratics, you can simplify them right off the bat without doing any of the factoring methods. Now, how would I simplify this right off the bat? Well, I can see that it has something in common. It has a 2 in common. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, if I divide by 2, 2 goes evenly into each of these numbers. 4 divided by 2 is 2, so we get 2x squared minus 18 divided by 2 is 9x, and 8 divided by 2 is plus 4. So I could simplify that quadratic to this new quadratic just by dividing everything by 2. Now, once I have this new quadratic, I will then do our AC method to further simplify it. So our AC method says 2 times 4. So AC equals 2 times 4, which is 8. Now, what are the factors of 8? Our factors of 8 are 1 and 8 and 2 and 4. Now, we have to remember that the sum of these have to equal negative 9. Now, because we have a positive right here, this is a positive, we have to remember that both of these terms then have to be negative. because a negative and a negative equal a positive. So when we add those up, what are our sums? Well, negative 1 plus negative 8 is 9, negative 9. And negative 2 plus negative 4 is negative 6. Therefore, we see that this is the correct option. Now, using the multiply divide method, we immediately have two parentheses. We put an x minus 1 and an x minus 8. And we look, what do we need the x times x to make x squared be? Well, we need that 2. So we put a 2 in front, and whatever we do on the left, we have to then divide on the right. So we multiply it on the left, we divide on the right. And we finally get 2x minus 1 and x minus 4. When we FOIL, we can see that that indeed does equal the original trinomial that we had. Alright, so now that I rewrote our quadratic, again, we got that way by using our GCF, which is 2, remember, and dividing the entire quadratic by 2, and we got our trinomial of 2x squared minus 9x plus 4. Now I'm going to use the like term factor method to factor this quadratic. We still use the AC method over here, so I'm going to rewrite the AC method. AC equals 2 times 4, which is 8, 2 times 4, which equals 8, and we found that our terms have to be negative 1 and negative 8, and why is that? Well, that equals negative 9. The sum of those equal negative 9, which is our b value. But in the like term factoring method, we want to split up that negative 9x into its like terms. And what are its like terms? It's a negative 8x and a negative 1x. See how we just split those up? We bring down that 4 and we bring down the 2x squared. Now, once we get to this step, we're looking for things that these terms have in common. So we can see when we look at that, and then we're also going to look at that. What do they have in common? Well, the 2x squared minus 8x have a 2 and an x in common. So we have our parentheses. Now we ask ourselves, 2x times what number will give us x squared? And we find that to be x. 2x times x will give us x squared. And we keep that minus, and we say 2x times what number will give us 8x? And we know that 4 would give us 8x. So 2x times a negative 4 will give us 8x. We keep that negative from above, and we look at what those have in common. Well, what can we take out? Well, it looks like we can take out a negative 1. If we take a negative 1 out, negative 1 times what number gives us negative 1x? An x. And negative 1 times what number gives us a positive 4? Well, that would be a negative 4. Because negative 1 times a negative 4 would give us a positive 4. Now, we said in this method, we have to make sure that the terms in the parentheses equal one another. They're the same. And we can see x minus 4, so they are. So we can move forward. Now, since we are doing a double distribution on using the same parentheses, we can rewrite this expression as 2x minus 1 in parentheses, 2x minus 1 in parentheses, and x minus 4. Now, when we look above, is that factor the same as what we found above? And they are, and I'll box them. Here's our final answer using the multiply divide method, and here's our final answer using the like term factoring method.